when the scope revealed a soul. The crosshairs settled on his left temple, steady as death itself. Lieutenant Juno Reeves held her breath, finger poised on the trigger of her plasma rifle, watching Commander Thane Voss through the magnified scope. As he stumbled through the wreckage of the mining facility below, she had been tracking him for 3 hours through the twisted metal corridors and collapsed tunnels of Nexus Prime, waiting for the perfect shot. "Target acquired," she whispered into her comm unit, her voice barely audible even to herself. "Clean. Line of sight, no obstructions." Sergeant Beck Torres, her spotter, lay prone beside her on the catwalk overlooking the main processing floor. His scanner hummed softly as he tracked heat signatures throughout the facility. "Confirmed. No Coalition backup within 2 clicks. You're clear to take the shot." Juno's finger tightened on the trigger. Thane Voss was Coalition intelligence, responsible for the bombing of the Terran medical station on Kepler 7. 38 medics and patients had died in that attack, including her younger brother Marcus, who had been recovering from shrapnel wounds. She had every reason to pull that trigger, every justification carved into her heart by months of grief and rage. But something made her pause. Through the scope, she watched Thane lean heavily against a support beam, his dark Coalition uniform, torn and stained with blood. His face was pale, exhausted, human in a way that the intelligence briefings had never suggested. He wasn't the monster she had imagined, wasn't the faceless enemy who haunted her nightmares. He was just a man, wounded and alone, trying to survive in the ruins of a war neither of them had started. "Reeves," Beck's voice cut through her hesitation. "What's the delay?" "Getting a better angle," she lied, watching as Thane pulled out a small data pad and began typing with shaking fingers. What was he doing? Calling for extraction? Sending intelligence back to Coalition Command? She should have taken the shot already. Captain Ridge Matthias crackled through the comm from the extraction point. "Sniper Team Alpha, we have incoming. Coalition forces. Estimated arrival in 15 minutes. Complete your mission and move to evac." 15 minutes. Juno's heart hammered against her ribs as she maintained her sight picture on Thane's head. Through the scope, she could see details she hadn't noticed before. The thin scar along his jawline, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead, the exhaustion etched into the lines around his eyes. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Juno!" Beck's voice was sharp now. "Take the shot." Her finger hovered over the trigger. One squeeze and it would be over. Justice for Marcus, for the medics, for every Terran life lost to Coalition intelligence operations. But as she watched, Thane suddenly doubled over, coughing up blood onto the metal floor. The data pad slipped from his fingers and skittered across the grating. "He's wounded," she said, more to herself than to Beck. "Good. Makes him an easier target." But that wasn't what Juno meant. Through the scope, she could see the way Thane pressed his hand to his side, the way his breathing came in short pained gasps. He was dying slowly, bleeding out in the wreckage of Nexus Prime. Her shot would be a mercy at this point, a quick end to what was clearly going to be a prolonged and painful death. She should have felt satisfaction at that thought. Instead, she felt something uncomfortably close to sympathy. "Reeves, what's your status?" Captain Matthias's voice carried an edge of impatience. "Still acquiring," she replied, watching as Thane retrieved his datapad with obvious effort. His hands were shaking worse now, whether from blood loss or exhaustion. She couldn't tell. Through the scope, she saw him look up suddenly, directly at her position. For a moment, their eyes met across the scope. He couldn't possibly see her, in the shadows of the upper catwalk, but somehow he was looking right at her. His expression wasn't fearful or angry. It was resigned, almost peaceful, as if he had accepted his fate long before a Terran sniper had found him in her crosshairs. "Shit," Beck muttered, checking his scanner. "Coalition patrol, moving fast, 2 minutes out." Juno's training screamed at her to take the shot. Her orders were clear. Her duty was absolute. But her finger wouldn't move. Through the scope, she watched Thane nod once, as if acknowledging her presence, then turn his attention back to his datapad. He wasn't trying to call for help or send intelligence. He was typing what looked like a personal message, his fingers moving slowly across the screen. "What are you doing?" she whispered. As if in answer, Thane held up the datapad so she could see the screen through her scope. The words were in Terran standard, not Coalition script. "Tell my sister I tried to be better than this war." Juno's breath caught in her throat. She pulled back from the scope, blinking hard. When she looked again, Thane had set the datapad aside and was sitting with his back against the support beam, eyes closed, waiting for death to come from above or from within. "Juno, take the goddamn shot," Beck hissed. The sound of Coalition boots echoed through the facility, heavy, measured steps moving through the lower levels. They would find Thane in minutes, and then Juno's opportunity would be gone. She would have failed her mission, failed her brother's memory, failed everything she had sworn to uphold. But she couldn't pull the trigger. "Negative," she said quietly, beginning to pack up her rifle. "Target compromised." Beck stared at her in disbelief. "What the hell are you talking about? You have a clean shot." "Coalition patrol incoming, position compromised, we need to move." She was already slinging her rifle across her back, but her eyes remained fixed on Thane through the catwalk's mesh flooring. The Coalition soldiers would be here soon, but they weren't the only ones who knew these tunnels. Reeves confirmed target elimination. Captain Matthias's voice crackled through the comm. Juno looked at Beck, then back down at Thane, who was still sitting motionless against the beam. Blood was pooling beneath him now, dark against the metal, grating. He wouldn't last much longer without medical attention. "Target eliminated," she said into the comm, hating herself for the lie. Beck grabbed her arm as she started to move. "What are you doing?" "Following orders," she replied, shaking him off. "We're supposed to extract." "That's what we're doing," but instead of heading toward the extraction point, Juno began moving deeper into the facility, toward the maintenance tunnels that would take her down to the processing floor. Beck followed, cursing under his breath. "This is insane," he muttered. "He's Coalition intelligence. He's the enemy." "He's dying," Juno replied, dropping through an access hatch into the lower level. "And he's alone." She couldn't explain why. That mattered to her. Couldn't justify the decision that was taking her toward the man she had been ordered to kill instead of away from him. All she knew was that when she had looked through that scope, she hadn't seen an enemy. She had seen someone's brother, someone's son, someone who was trying to be better than the war that had shaped them all. The Coalition patrol was close now. She could hear their voices echoing through the corridors, sharp and urgent in Coalition dialect. They were searching for Thane just as she had been, but their orders were probably different. They would want him alive, want the intelligence he carried, want answers about his mission on Nexus Prime. Juno reached the processing floor and found Thane exactly where she had left him, slumped against the support beam with his eyes closed. Up close, she could see how young he was, probably no older than she was. The blood on his uniform was fresh, and she could see the entry wound in his side where Coalition standard-issue flechette rounds had torn through the fabric. Friendly fire, she realized. His own people had shot him. "Commander Voss," she said quietly, keeping her rifle ready, but not aimed at him. His eyes opened slowly, focusing on her with obvious effort. When he saw her Terran uniform, his expression didn't change. No surprise, no fear. Just that same resigned acceptance she had seen through the scope. "Lieutenant," he said, his voice hoarse. "Are you here to finish what they started?" Juno knelt beside him, checking his wound. It was bad, but not immediately. Fatal if treated properly. "Depends," she said, pulling medical supplies from her pack. "Are you going to try to kill me?" A weak smile crossed his face. "With what? I can barely sit up." The Coalition voices were getting closer. Juno worked quickly, applying pressure to the wound and sealing it with emergency biofoam. Thane watched her work, confusion replacing resignation in his dark eyes. "Why?" he asked. Juno didn't have an answer that made sense even to herself. "Because someone should," she said finally. She helped him to his feet, supporting his weight as they moved toward the maintenance tunnel she had used to reach the processing floor. Behind them, Coalition soldiers emerged into the main chamber, their voices sharp with urgency as they found blood but no body. "This way," Juno whispered, guiding Thane into the narrow tunnel that would take them deeper into the facility's forgotten levels. As they disappeared into the darkness, she wondered what she had just done. She had disobeyed orders, lied to her commanding officer, and saved the life of an enemy intelligence officer. By any definition, she had committed treason. But as Thane leaned against her shoulder, his breathing steadying slightly as the blood loss slowed, Juno found she didn't regret her choice. Through her scope, she had seen a soul, and once you see someone's soul, it becomes impossible to take their life, even if they are the enemy you were trained to kill. Where enemies become echoes of ourselves. The maintenance tunnels beneath Nexus Prime's mining facility hadn't been used in decades, and it showed. Rust flaked from the walls like dried blood, and the air tasted of metal and regret. Juno supported Thane's weight as they navigated the narrow passages, their footsteps echoing softly in the darkness ahead and behind them. "There's a research bunker about 2 clicks east," Thane said, his voice strained but steady. "Abandoned. Neural interface lab. Should have medical supplies." Juno glanced at him sharply. "How do you know about Coalition research facilities on Nexus Prime?" "Because it's not Coalition," he replied, wincing as they navigated around a collapsed section of tunnel. "It's pre-war. Joint Terran-Coalition research project from before everything went to hell. The Neural Interface Program." Juno had heard whispers about it during her intelligence briefings, fragments of information about experimental consciousness sharing, technology that both sides had pursued before the war made cooperation impossible. She had assumed it was just another failed diplomatic initiative, buried under years of bloodshed and mutual mistrust. They moved in silence for several minutes, the only sounds their breathing and the distant echoes of search teams combing the upper levels. Juno's mind raced as she tried to process what she had done. By now, Captain Matthias would be wondering why she and Beck hadn't reached the extraction point. Beck himself was probably halfway back to base, ready to report her inexplicable behavior to command. She was finished. Court-martial, prison, or worse. But as she felt Thane's weight against her shoulder, his breathing gradually becoming less labored as the biofoam sealed his wound, she found she still didn't regret her choice. "Why were you on Nexus Prime?" she asked as they climbed through a maintenance shaft toward the surface. Thane was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "I was trying to stop something. A weapon my people are developing. Neural warfare technology based on the old interface program. Coalition intelligence doesn't usually produce whistleblowers." "No," he agreed. "They don't." They emerged into a section of the facility that had been abandoned even before the current conflict. Research laboratories lined the corridors, their equipment covered in dust and silence. Most of the doors were sealed, but Thane led her to one that opened with a soft hiss of equalizing pressure. Inside, the lab looked like it had been evacuated in a hurry. Computers still hummed with power, their screens flickering with data streams that hadn't been interrupted in years. Medical supplies were scattered across workbenches, and in the center of the room stood a device that made Juno's blood run cold. It was a neural interface chair, identical to the ones she had seen in classified Terran military facilities. Sleek, metallic, designed to link human consciousness with computer systems, or with other human minds. "You know what this is," Thane said, settling carefully into a regular chair beside the workbench. Juno nodded, her throat suddenly dry. "Neural interface technology. We've been working on it for years." "So have we. Based on research from this facility." Thane pulled out his datapad and connected it to one of the lab's computers. Dr. Felix Caney ran the program before the war, brilliant scientist, completely idealistic about what consciousness sharing could do for interspecies understanding. What happened to him? Recruited by Coalition intelligence after the war started, forced to weaponize his research. Thane's voice carried a weight of personal knowledge. "They've been using his neural interface technology to interrogate prisoners, extract memories, break minds." Juno felt sick. She had undergone neural interface training as part of her sniper program. learning to link her consciousness with targeting, systems for improved accuracy. The technology was supposed to enhance human capability, not destroy it. "That's what you were trying to stop," she said, among other things. Thane looked up at her, his dark eyes intense despite his exhaustion. "But I think I might have been too late. They've already deployed the first wave of neural warfare units." As he spoke, Juno felt a strange sensation, like someone walking across her grave. A tingling at the base of her skull, where her own neural interface implant was embedded. She had assumed it was inactive, powered down since her last training session, but now it felt warm, almost alive. "Thane," she said slowly, "when did you last use neural interface technology?" 3 days ago. Coalition intelligence wanted me to test their new interrogation protocols. His hand moved unconsciously to the same spot at the base of his skull. They implanted a new interface unit, military grade, designed for extended consciousness sharing. The tingling sensation grew stronger. Juno sat down heavily in the chair across from him, her mind racing. "I have an interface too, Terran military, standard, but it's supposed to be inactive." Thane stared at her for a moment, then began typing rapidly on his datapad. Dr. Kane's research suggested that compatible neural interfaces could establish spontaneous connections under certain conditions. Emotional stress, physical proximity, shared experiences like being enemies who chose not to kill each other. Exactly like that. The lab's computers chimed softly, and suddenly Juno could feel something that wasn't her own, a flutter of anxiety, a dull ache in her side where she had never been wounded, a crushing weight of guilt and regret that belonged to someone else's conscience. "Oh God," she whispered, pressing her palm to her forehead. "I can feel you." Thane nodded grimly. "And I can feel you. Your anger about your brother, your confusion about saving me, your fear about what happens next." The connection deepened without warning, and suddenly Juno was experiencing Thane's memories as if they were her own. She saw the Coalition medical station bombing from his perspective, felt his horror as he realized the intelligence he had provided had been used to target civilians. She experienced his desperate attempts to warn the station, his failure to prevent the attack that had killed her brother. "You tried to stop it," she gasped, the memory hitting her like a physical blow. "I failed," Thane replied, and she could feel his self-hatred like acid in her veins. "My intelligence led to that bombing. I've been trying to make amends ever since." Through the neural link, she felt his memories of the past 3 days. The desperate mission to Nexus Prime to steal Coalition research data, the betrayal by his own handlers when they realized what he was trying to do. The friendly fire that had wounded him in the mining facility left him to die by the people he had served faithfully for years. In return, he experienced her memories of Marcus, her younger brother who had wanted to be a medic instead of a soldier, her grief at his death, her rage at the Coalition intelligence officer responsible, her shock at discovering that the officer she had been sent to kill was the same man who had tried to save her brother's life. "We're both victims," Juno said, tears streaming down her face. "This war has made us both into something we never wanted to be. And now we're connected," Thane added. "Permanently, by the look of it." The lab's proximity sensors began beeping, urgently. On the security display, Juno could see 2 groups converging on their location. Terran soldiers from the west, Coalition forces from the east. Both groups were heavily armed and moving with purpose. "They've found us," she said. Thane moved to the neural interface chair and began activating the lab's systems. "This facility's computers are still connected to the old research network. If we broadcast our shared memories, both sides will experience what we've experienced. They'll see the war from both perspectives simultaneously. That could kill us, neural feedback from that many minds at once. Probably," Thane agreed. "But it might also stop this war before more people die." The lab doors burst open simultaneously. Terran soldiers poured in from one entrance, Coalition forces from the other. Juno recognized Captain Matthias among the Terrans, his face grim with betrayal and disappointment. The Coalition forces were led by a woman she didn't know, tall and severe with the bearing of high command. "Lieutenant Reeves," Captain Matthias said, his weapon trained on Thane. "Step away from the prisoner." "Commander Voss," the Coalition officer said, her voice cold as space. "You are under arrest for treason and theft of classified materials." Juno moved to stand beside Thane, placing herself between the two armed groups. Through the neural link, she could feel his calm determination, his acceptance of whatever came next. She drew strength from it, feeling more centered than she had since Marcus died. "His name is Major Kess Drayton," Thane said quietly, indicating the Coalition officer. "She's the one who ordered the bombing of the medical station. She's also the one who ordered me shot when I tried to expose the neural warfare program." "And that's Colonel Vera Nash," Juno added, looking at the Terran officer standing beside Captain Matthias. "She's been authorizing illegal neural interface experiments on Coalition prisoners." Both officers stepped forward, their weapons raised. "You're both delusional," Colonel Nash said. "Prolonged neural interface exposure can cause hallucinations, false memories." "Can it cause this?" Juno asked, activating the research lab's broadcast system. Suddenly, everyone in the room was connected. Terran and Coalition soldiers alike staggered as their minds were flooded with shared memories, shared emotions, shared experiences of loss and fear and hope. Through the neural network, they experienced the war from every perspective simultaneously. They felt Juno's grief for her brother and Thane's guilt over failing to save him. They experienced the terror of Coalition civilians during Terran orbital bombardments and the anguish of Terran medics treating wounded soldiers. They lived through the memories of families torn apart by war, of children who grew up knowing only conflict, of soldiers on both sides who questioned what they were fighting for. Most importantly, they felt the moment when Juno looked through her scope and saw not an enemy, but a soul. And the moment when Thane realized that the Terran sniper, pointing a rifle at his head, was choosing mercy over vengeance. The connection lasted only minutes, but it changed everything. When the neural link finally broke, soldiers from both sides were staring at each other with new understanding. Some were crying. Others looked sick with the weight of what they had experienced. Major Drayton lowered her weapon slowly. "The neural warfare program," she said, her voice shaking. "What have we done?" Colonel Nash sat down heavily, her face pale. "The prisoner experiments. Dear God, what have we become?" Juno felt Thane's hand slip into hers, their neural interfaces still connected, still sharing the weight of what they had experienced together. Around them, soldiers from both sides were beginning to talk, to share their own stories, to see each other as human beings, rather than enemies. "This is how it ends," Thane said softly, his voice reaching her through both sound and thought, not with surrender or victory, but with understanding. Juno squeezed his hand, feeling the echo of his emotions in her own mind. They were still enemies, technically. She was still Terran, he was still Coalition. But they were also something new, something the war had never created before. Two people who had chosen to see past the conflict to the humanity beneath. The neural interface technology that had been designed to break minds and extract secrets had instead forged connections that transcended everything the war had tried to teach them. As more soldiers from both sides activated their own neural interfaces, linking their consciousness with former enemies, Juno realized that Dr. Kane's original vision was finally coming true. Consciousness. Sharing technology wasn't a weapon, it was a bridge. And sometimes bridges were exactly what the galaxy needed most.